210. Let's start at the bottom. The first fight is Janelle Lasaw versus Magmagod, and his last name's really hard to say. I think Janelle looks really good. He's a striker with some decent grappling, but I would just say he's okay overall. I think Magmagod looks like a really solid grappler, and I think he's probably one of the better looking flyweights coming up right now outside of the UFC. And I think he's going to be able to take this fight to the ground and probably win by decision or submission, so I'm going to pick Magmagod. Next is Katlyn, hard last name, versus Irene Alden. And I think Irene looks like a little bit better of a striker. I think they're both striker chicks, and neither of these chicks looks amazing, but I'm just going to go with Irene just because I think she's the slightly better striker. Next is Josh Emmett versus Desmond Green. Desmond Green's a really good wrestler, but that's about it. He doesn't have a lot of finishes, but that's really all I have to say about him is he's a strong wrestler. I think Josh Emmett's, from Team Alpha Male, his wrestling looks amazing, and his striking also looks amazing. He's undefeated. I think he's way better than Desmond is. I think he's going to be able to stuff the takedowns, and I'm not sure if he'll win by knockout just because he doesn't have a lot of knockouts on his record, but he should be able to control this whole fight with his takedown defense and striking. Next is Gregor Glipsky versus Andrew Holbrook. Gregor is definitely the better wrestler, but I think Andrew's the better overall fighter. I think his striking and jiu-jitsu are better than Desmond's striking and jiu-jitsu. It's close just because I think Gregor's wrestling is good enough he could grind it out, but I'm going to go with Andrew. I think he looked really impressive in his last fight against Jake Matthews, and I think he's going to be able to pull out a submission sooner or later. Next is Patrick Cummings versus Jan Blachowicz, and both these guys have, they're both okay, and they both kind of have something that can beat each other. Patrick Cummings' biggest weakness is his striking isn't great, but Jan Blachowicz's biggest weakness is that his takedown defense and grappling off his back isn't that great. And it's just one of those things where if it's a striker versus a grappler, I'm going to lean towards the grappler. I think Patrick Cummings' striking is decent enough to where he can stand with Jan long enough to where he can get the takedowns and just control him from on top. So I'm going to pick Patrick Cummings. I say he wins by decision. Next is Charles Rosa versus Shane Burgos. And these guys are pretty similar. They're both strikers with some decent grappling, but I think Charles Rosa is a really amazing jiu-jitsu guy and one of the better up-and-comers in my opinion. I think that striking they'll be about even, but when it hits the ground, I think Rosa will be able to hit the scrambles and probably get a submission late second maybe. Next is Kamaru Usman versus Shane Strickland. Shane Strickland is a really good striker, and his takedown defense is also really good. But to me, Kamaru Usman and that other guy, that white guy, Colby Covington, they're kind of like the next generation of wrestler. Guys that can just shoot for takedowns nonstop in a fight and not get tired. And then they can just control you throughout the fight. And I just feel like, even though Sean Strickland's takedown defense is good and his ability to get back up is good, I just feel like Kamaru Usman's going to be able to hold him against the fence and hold him on the ground, because the guy that's going to be able to beat like a Kamaru Usman is a guy that's going to be able to kind of out-wrestle him or keep him away from him. I don't feel like Sean Strickland's got that ability to turn off the fence that he needs to. I think that Usman's just going to be able to grind it out. I don't think this fight's going to be very exciting, but I think Usman's going to win a solid 30-27 decision. Next is Miles Jury versus Mike De La Torre. Mike De La Torre is good. I mean, he's got good striking, good jiu-jitsu, but I think that he's kind of got that Matt Brown problem where his offense is really good, but his defense is really shit. I think that the same thing with Miles Jury. Miles Jury is a really good striker with really good jiu-jitsu, but I think he's really technically sound everywhere. There isn't a whole lot of holes in his game. I just think there are guys that are more well-rounded than him, and he's lost to them. But I don't think that that's Mike De La Torre. I think that this is going to be back and forth until Miles Jury finds an opening and he's going to capitalize it and probably win by submission. Next is Will Brooks versus Charles Oliveira. And, Charles Oliveira moving back to 55, if he can't make the weight anymore, then that's fine. I just think that Will Brooks is a little bit better of a striker, and I think he's got pretty solid wrestling offensively and defensively. You never know, Charles Oliveira. I mean, he's really good at getting fights to the ground. If he does, I think he could hit a submission, but I just don't see it happening. I think that Will Brooks, he was winning that fight against Alex Oliveira until he kind of popped his rib out. I think, he's still one of the best guys at lightweight, and I think that he's going to win this fight by TKO once Oliveira starts getting tired. So I'm going to pick Will Brooks. Next is Thiago Alves versus Patrick Cote. And this is one of those fights that, I mean, it's just an exciting fight in my opinion. I think that with Thiago Alves, he hasn't looked amazing in my opinion in a while. I think if you look at his last like 5 fights, he's 2-3. And 2 of those losses was against a guy that, you know, has lost like his last 5 in a row on Seth Baczynski. And then the fight against Jordan Mein where he was getting the shit kicked out of him and then he just threw that body kick in the second round. And then, you know, he lost to Carlos Condit and he lost to Jim Miller. I just feel like Thiago Alves, you know, he even though he has some wins, he hasn't looked amazing. As for Patrick Cote, you know, his last 5 fights, I think he's gone 3-2 or something like that. But his losses were to like Cerrone and Stephen Thompson, and then all of his wins were really solid wins against guys like Ben Saunders and stuff like that. I feel like Patrick Cote is not necessarily in the prime of his career, but he's just more consistent at this point, and I think that he'll be able to edge out a decision or maybe even get a late TKO. Next is Cynthia, hard last name, versus Pearl Gonzalez. Why is this fight on the main card? This is so fucking stupid. Like, I hate it when people that aren't ranked and, like, have 0 fights in the UFC are on the main card. Just because they're, like, kind of up-and-comerish. I mean, if it's a fight night, I can understand, but this is a fucking pay-per-view. You know what I mean? Like, come on, Usman or, what the hell was it? Patrick Cummings and Jan. You know, those guys are all ranked. I don't understand why we're not getting the best fights on the main card. Like, people pay for this stuff. It's just ridiculous in my opinion. I think Cynthia's going to blow Pearl out of the water. I think that, you know, she's 1-0 in the UFC, and she fights out Team Alpha Male, and I think the same thing is going to happen. I think she's going to get a takedown and win by rear naked choke. Next is Chris Weidman versus Gegard Mousasi. And I think that this is going to be a tough fight for Weidman. I think that Mousasi's the better striker. I think that Chris is definitely the better jiu-jitsu guy, but Mousasi has really good takedown defense, and his jiu-jitsu off his back is probably one of the better ones in the middleweight division. I don't know. I just feel like Chris isn't going to use a lot of wrestling in this fight for some reason, because he usually doesn't use a whole lot of wrestling in his fights. And I think that if this fight is a boxing match throughout, I think that Mousasi's the better boxer overall. And I just feel like he might get a TKO. And that's just how I see it. I think Mousasi's going to win by late TKO in the 3rd. Next is Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. And I know a lot of people are kind of high on Rumble Johnson right now, but I don't see anything being that different from the first fight. I think that Rumble might be able to drop him like one more time than he did because his striking is just a little bit more on point recently. But I think it's going to be the same outcome. I think that Rumble will probably win the first 2 rounds, drop Cormier twice. But in those rounds, Cormier is going to be able to hold him up against the fence and get some takedowns here and there, grind on him. And then maybe Rumble makes it to the 4th, maybe not. It depends on how tired he gets. But I think sooner or later, he's going to lose like how he loses all of his fights. He's going to give up his back once he starts getting tired. And then someone's going to win by rear naked choke. I mean, literally every single loss Daniel Rumble has, except for the one where the guy poked him in the eye, which I don't know how that fight is in a no contest. Like, if you watch it, he got poked in the eye. All of his losses are rear naked choke losses, and I feel like it's because he just gets tired and he kind of gives up. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be a dick, but he really does. I mean, once he starts to get tired, and if he's on the ground, he kind of gives up his back, and then the rear naked choke just happens. And I feel like that's what's going to happen. He's going to drop Cormier like twice, maybe 3 times. But Cormier's going to do what he did last time, just get up, push him against the fence, grind him out, and eventually, you know, once Anthony gets tired, DC's going to take his back and win by rear naked choke. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe.